Well, hello. This is Wednesday morning here in Australia. It is 10 a.m. and time for our weekly building influence training. And I'm going live across multiple different platforms. I know that there's a special place in my heart for the change makers over in my Facebook community, Podcasting with Purpose. If you're not yet a member, go and join, because there's awesome relationships being built by change makers all over the world. Podcastingwithpurpose.com/community. By the way, let me know where you are calling in from, perhaps. Well, calling in from, you're not really calling in, are you? Pix, good morning. One of the change makers who will be launching her podcast very, very soon. Let me know where you're calling in from. I know that we've got a global community. Today, I'm going to be talking about how to build influence by becoming an influential podcast interviewer. Sajid, great to see you from San Francisco. Pat, good morrow. Yes, I know we're calling in from your future. I always say to my my Facebook friends and community, LinkedIn, I know you're here as well, but people in the US, even the UK and other countries, I'm calling in from your future, and just let me tell you, it is going to be an awesome day. Brizzy, you're from Brizzy. There you are. GY in Sydney. Yeah, I'm in Melbourne. Apparently, not that I want to bring in the whole, C word, COVID, but Melburnians, I promise I will not spread any germs. I mean, my goodness, what a crazy world we are living in. But thank you for joining me. So today, and I'm going to share my screen because I do have some slides that I want to share. This is often something that I'm asked, Annemarie, how can I be a better interviewer? What do I need to do? How can I handle difficult guests, the guests that we just love to deal with, from the guests that won't stop talking about themselves right through to those one-syllable answers or one-word answers where you think, wow, this is going to be a difficult interview. I'm going to take my ring off because it's whacking the side of my desk. All right, so today's interview topic is going to be interviewing with purpose. Are you an engaging host? Now, for those of you who have not met me before, my name is Annemarie Cross. Branding communications, personal branding is my thing. I've been doing that for many years in the career space, well over 2 decades ago. Now, of course, helping entrepreneurs. But more recently, because I've been podcasting since 2008 and actually been doing audio since 2005 in my career practice, really specializing in podcasting, but particularly podcasting strategy and how can you build your business online with a solid podcast strategy. So just to give you a bit of a snapshot of where I'm drawing my experience, I know when I first started podcasting, back in 2008, there were no mentors around in the podcasting space, particularly kind of interviewing people on a podcast. It's quite different to radio because, if you think of mainstream media and radio, they tend, talkback is slightly different, of course. However, with a podcast, and many of you who are listening today, I'm assuming it's your own business, and therefore you want to create a podcast to be able to build awareness, to be able to get your message out. So you've got your own agenda. You've got your, a license to be able to share your message in the way that you wanted to share it. And so back then I did hire a mentor after the first 2 years in podcasting on our own. My co-host and I, we had no idea what we were doing. We just knew that we needed to share our message of inspiration and hope after the global financial crisis. And then after we stopped the podcast, I thought I really needed to seek out some support. So I did hire a mentor who'd come from mainstream radio, and they were certainly able to give me some pointers. But over the years, these are the podcasts that I've hosted, many podcasts. I've also had experience, and I will share that experience today. In interviewing panels. So when you get multiple personalities kind of speaking about the same topic, or maybe they bring in different topics, there's something about being able to hold your space where you invite others to speak into that, leading, because you've got some people who might want to talk over the top. It's a whole kind of, whole other dynamics when you are managing different personalities and trying to create the story that flows. Hosted panels for online, in person, masterclasses and podcasts, hosted Tally Summit, emceed events as well. So drawing from a lot of different areas. I have said before, and I'll say again, I'm an introvert, but get me behind a microphone and something just clicks. Love that. Hey, Gladys. Yes, it certainly is perfect for those people just starting a podcast. So why is this very important? Why is this so important? Well, you would have heard me say, and I'm going to repeat this particular statistic, this study that was done. It's one that I often will recommend to, and I keep in touch with, keep my finger on the pulse, if you will, with this particular annual study, because of the fact that they really do kind of, when they're doing their survey, reach out to a diverse and broad community of people who provide some really interesting information that, as communicators, as marketers, as business owners, as human beings relating with other human beings, we want to know about. And so Edelman Trust Barometer in 2019 said that the expectations for CEOs to take the lead in driving change and not leaving it up to the government, diversity, as far as diversity, as far as environment, the feedback that Edelman got was that they expected CEOs to step forward and share on in the community, what's going on, things that people cared about. And so for me, it's really interesting when we see, other influencers or thought leaders in the area of, say, social media or just in business, speaking out about some of the things that are going on a global scale, and people stepping forward and saying, hey, stay in your own lane. This has got nothing to do with you. Well, I have to disagree with that. It has everything to do with them, because we've got a platform, so we're able to speak into it. But studies have shown that our community expects us to do that. So what has this got to do with podcasting and being a podcast host? Well, one of the things that was deemed as very important was that people expected us to be aware of our values, to be aware of our purpose. What does your business stand for? What are your core values? And are you speaking core values, and are you living out your core values? There's a difference between saying this is important to me but not living it out. And I think that, not being aligned or in alignment with what you say is important in your actions and interactions and conversations, you're going to get called out. So stepping out on a podcast, you want to make sure that you have this identified, and you can also ensure that when you are aware of that, you bring that to every single conversation that you have. So very important. Something else that the 2019 study demonstrated or showed was that mistrust, because we're talking about building trust, and we know as business owners, building know, like, and trust is so important. But mistrust was also built, or was also kind of there if a piece of content was over scripted or seemed like someone had rehearsed it too much. And so that's why that authenticity, not being absolutely perfect, not having, your whole studio, it doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, if something looks too perfect, studies show that maybe you are seen then as being a bit mistrusting. Is this someone trying to hide something to be aware of? Now, 2020 Edelman Trust Barometer demonstrated that the way that we build trust has changed. It has changed. At the moment, we are in a bit of a trust bubble because of the fact that there are some pretty significant things happening, changes happening. People are not really certain of their future. So we are looking a lot more now to news outlets, to social platforms, to our peers, to our colleagues, to employers, to government, to media, whereas previously to what happened, with the economy and what's going on with COVID. Previous to that, trust was built on competence and ethics. And to me, competence means excellence and ethics means integrity, which is exciting because excellence and integrity are two of my core values. And I know of many of my ideal clients and my clients' core values as well. What's really important is that authenticity and being aware of, well, what is authenticity to me? What's authentic for me? Because what's authentic to me may be very different to what's authentic for you. But you need to be able to define that first, what that is for you, so that you can bring that forward intentionally, purposefully. So fake personas, or that whole fake it till you make it, can cause mistrust. And trying to be someone that you are not, especially in the way you communicate and that you relate to someone or some people, if you're doing a panel interview, can be exhausting. And you don't want to do that. So that's why it's so important as a host. Now, we know that it can take time to build know, like, and trust. We also know that that trust can be broken in an instant. And so that's why you do not want to be unsure and uncertain about who I am, how I'm going to step forward and relate to guests on my podcast and show up, so that, you know, from show to show to show, your audience is going, now, who's going to show up on the show today? What persona is the host going to show up today? And so it's hard to be authentic if you don't know what authenticity means for you. And it's really very different. As a host, you are responsible for the entire show, from the opening right through to the close and everything in between. That means you don't want to have any fluff or banter. That means you want to avoid that awkwardness and inability to be able to manage the flow of the conversation. And not keeping the show focused on the theme or the topics of the particular podcast can also turn listeners off. Now, there are some situations where there may be a bit of an echo that's coming through from my guest's side, which means I cannot really get in there and interact as I would tend to want to, because when I speak, there's that echo. And I notice how for me, that kind of puts me off. I mean, I obviously need to just kind of maintain my my pose and just let the guest continue to speak and not interject as much. But I know as that host, and then kind of be guided by the guest, and hope that the questions that I ask are so pointed to the content that I want that guest to share, that they're not going to go off. And I will jump in and pull that guest back gently if they do tend to go off topic. But this is so very important. You're consistently managing the core. You know, you're looking at, can I dive deeper into that? Do I need to bring the guest back because they're going too deep and we need to, kind of move that show on? That is your responsibility. And it's something that my co-host and I have learned. I've learned that over the years. I remember one of our very first guests, we asked, how are you? Tell us a bit about yourself. 20 minutes later, she was still telling us about herself, bless her. And I was Skyping my co-host because we were in different locations, saying, you need to jump in and interrupt her. And he was saying, I'm waiting for the right time. We felt awkward in doing that. This is your show. It's not their show. It's your show. And so you need to jump in there and take control. That's why it's so important. And you would have heard me say before, it's so true. People will come for the topic, but they'll return for the host. So I'm certain that the topic that you are talking about on your podcast is probably a topic that 10, 20, 100, maybe even 1,000 or more podcasts are speaking into. But the way that you speak about it, the stories that you share, who you are, and the character and mannerisms that you bring to the show, that's what's really different. And that's why someone would rather come and listen to your show and subscribe to your show, because of the way you interact with the guests, because of who you are. And I remember sharing a post on LinkedIn where I said this, and someone said to me, commented and said, you know what? I'd never really thought of it that way. But if I think of the number of podcasts that I subscribe to, and if I've got a limited amount of time, I'll scan through and I'll go, oh, I'll listen to that one because I like that host. There you go. Answered that question. The reason people come back and subscribe and listen to you is because of the host. And that is often the same as well with other shows, even from mainstream media, whether it be TV or radio. There are some hosts that you just enjoy because you like who they are, what they stand for, and just, that entertainment factor as well. So you can't be that host that someone subscribed to and become that trusted authority unless you know who that is and who that is for you. So this is something that I shared not so long ago, podcast positioning quadrant. This is really important too, because when you think about your audience and also your authority, you need to have some core components within each of those areas to ensure that you're not just an entertainer, and not that there's anything wrong with that. There are some people who are just want to entertain. That is fine. There are some co-hosts that all they want to do is entertain. I know that there's some podcasts that start up where they will get together and talk about a particular show because I love that show, and they've got a massive audience who will often come and participate in that conversation. Whether they're monetizing or not, it's a different story. But let me go through. I'm not going to go through each of those things, but I do want to identify why it matters, particularly if you are an aspiring thought leader, you are already a thought leader in your space, and you want to leverage a podcast to take your message out even further. Where you rank matters, and this is ranking on the podcast positioning quadrant, especially if you want to be seen as that trusted authority and be able to monetize your message. So there's three components. There's community, there's content, and there's charisma. And all of those three things are important, but where they intersect, that becomes where you are then seen as a trusted authority, with the community that you're building, with the content that you're consistently sharing of real value in your niche, as well as your charisma. So here are the three things in each of those components. So the community that you want to build, and this is important as a host, a podcast host. As you speak, you're speaking to a community that you're building that has a common desire or a common challenge. They want to feel connected, and they do feel connected to you and the community at large. They feel valued and they feel understood, and that they resonate with the culture that you are creating. Now, if you have not yet defined those three things, what it is, and for your community, it's very hard for you to be intentional. It's very hard for you to show up consistently, and it's very hard to build a connected community if you don't actually know who those people are that are going to be part of that community. Similarly, with the content that you share, has to be highly niched and relevant to your community, your ideal client. Has to be seen, especially when we're talking about thought leadership and being a trusted authority. You have to be seen as innovative. And it doesn't mean that you need to completely disrupt your industry. It may be that you're doing something quite uniquely or different that is a standout from the way that things are done. How can you challenge the status quo? How can you lead your market? And it has to be validated, has to be trusted and highly respected. If it's not, then it's very difficult to become that trusted authority if you're just putting out substandard content on your podcast and obviously in the content that you share. So whether you're having guests, and in this instance, we're assuming you're having guests because you want to interview other people, as well as having that charisma. And I have done a previous show with the amazing Sally Anderson around the it factor, owning your presence. So certainly go back. If you want to know where the link is, put a comment in the comment below. Give me the link to the show with Sally, and I'll make sure that I'll circle back and we'll add that link so you can listen to that brilliant show. Your present captivates and influences people. You cultivate this united purpose and passion, and you influence and inspire others. Many of my clients say to me, and often they don't share this out loud because it can be a little bit scary and they don't want their whole community to know this. But they say to me, Annemarie, I want to create a movement. I don't just want to create a business. I don't just have a message, but I want to create a movement to really impact the lives of my ideal clients and, of course, the community who they will go on to influence. You need to have a certain level of charisma to be able to inspire and empower. And so many, unfortunately, change makers that I speak to are undervaluing themselves. They don't see the brilliance in themselves necessarily. So that's a whole other topic we might do on another show. and another training. But these are the three things that you need to have in place. I'm just going to briefly go through each of these so that you can kind of rank yourself where you would be. So you need to rank yourself on this. Now, if you found that with the community that you're building, you didn't really have those three things in place, the content that you're sharing didn't really have that in place either, and the charisma, you're not really sure what that is for you, then you're most likely an entertainer, okay? So you need to go back onto those three things in each of the three quadrants that I mentioned earlier. Now, if you are ranking high in community, you're building that community with, a common challenge and common values and a common outcome, a desire, and you've got that, fantastic. Maybe the content's not quite there yet, but you have really captured that charisma and you're bringing that through and bringing that forward into your community, then you're probably seen more as a celebrity and an influencer. Again, nothing wrong with that. Maybe this is really what you're hoping to achieve. You don't really want to monetize expertise, but rather go on the back of your personal brand, which is fine. Then you would be ranked there. Now, maybe you really see that I haven't built this connected community that feels valued and really a following of like-minded people, but the content is exceptional. I'm often getting feedback on that. Maybe you're not really clear on the charisma aspect. Maybe you're then seen as that expert. And this is where I would often give the example of that maybe people will come and they'll scan and they'll listen to a particular episode because they love that content, but they may not necessarily stay, come back, or subscribe to your podcast. But you've given them some expertise and they like that topic maybe you've given, or maybe one of your guests has shared that content. So that would be more seen as an expert. But if you rank all three, community, content, and charisma, all of those three are relevant and they're in place, that's when you become that trusted authority. So you can give yourself a pat on the back. All right, so now I'm going to go through the questions that I want to ask you. Are you an engaging podcast host and interviewer? Across the community, content, and charisma that I've just covered, let's take the quiz. With this quiz, if you identify that, no, I haven't yet got that covered, haven't really got clarity around that, that's okay. I always celebrate the areas that I have not yet got in place, because now I know what I need to focus on to move me forward, to move that needle forward, so to speak. So what I'm going to do is ask you a set of questions in 5 pillars. I will share what each pillar is at the end of the pillars, the questions, and all you need to do is grab a pen and paper, draw 5 columns, and if it's a yes, put a tick, and we'll do some scoring at the end. So I hope that makes sense. Draw 5 columns, and now we're going to go through the questions, and if it's a yes, put a tick, and then at the end, we will tally up what that means for you. You don't need to share that with anyone. That's just for yourself. Okay, so here we go. So you can either write a yes or you can write a tick, put a tick. Okay, so the first pillar, the question starts off with, when it comes to me as the host of my podcast, I'm clear on my core values and am creating a unique and distinguishable experience on each of my shows. Can you list your core values? If you can't, that's fine. Then there would be a no for you. You would put a cross or don't put anything down. Pillar 1, first question, yes or no. Second question, I'm clear on my unique style and approach, which I know my audience loves and instantly connects with. Now, for those of you who may be thinking of starting a podcast, you can identify this with, say, some of the other ways that you are sharing your content, such as maybe you're doing lives and you've been able to identify the style in which you present, and maybe even speak on stage. Maybe you want to bring some of that into the podcast too. But again, yes or no. Yes or no. Next question. I leverage my unique style to be on purpose and intentional, which has become a distinguishable factor my audience loves about my show. And if this is a yes for you, then you will often get comments, I love how you this and this, whatever it is. You're so engaging, or I feel so inspired after listening to one of your shows. I love how you lay it out step by step. What is that for you? Can you answer yes to that? If so, put a tick. I have an empowering mindset, enabling me to conduct a powerful interview with all of my guests. Yes or no? All right. So that pillar, if you hadn't guessed, really identifies you as the host. That's one of the most important factors, because guess what? The constant is across all of your shows, whether you have guests on each of your shows or whether you have a mixture of guests and you doing solo shows. The consistent component of the show is you. So you need to be aware of who you are, and you need to know exactly what to do to bring that consistent experience that exudes your unique brand on your show. For instance, for me, my core brand word would be to inspire. So for me, if I'm talking about a difficult topic, I'll always want to draw out the lessons. We may dive into some of the difficulties and the challenges, but I will not leave people hanging there, because I need to then unpack, what can we learn from this message? How can I inspire, empower people through listening to my guests so that they can apply that in their own lives? And so I need to do that in a very intentional way. So, because I just know that that's what I need to deliver in my show and what I want to achieve. That's how I run, conduct every single one of my shows. And so that's what you need to do as well. Here's the next pillar. When it comes to preparing my guest, I have a streamlined process that provides the guest with everything he or she needs to best prepare for the show and know what to expect. Now, I've been in situations where, if I think back to the 2 years that I did the co-hosted show, we didn't really have a process. We pretty much had a lot of toing and froing, and we left a lot to, the guest to give us that content. And when I went out on my own, I recognized, goodness, I really need to have a structure and a system in place to save my time, so there's no toing and froing, but to best prepare the guest to know what to expect from my show, my style, all of that. Because if you have a guest that doesn't really know that, or that you can direct them to an area where they can get that information, they may be a little bit up in the air as well about that. So yes or no. Pillar 2, the second question, enables the guest to be able to share information that's relevant and aligned with your podcast's overall theme. Now, for those of you who are on LinkedIn and across other platforms, you would have heard me say time and time again, is that you have to have a core theme, especially if you want to become a trusted authority, seen as a thought leader in a niched area or for your area and industry. Then the guests that come on, whilst their topics may be complementary to you, you do need to be able to provide context and segue and show what's relevant to the content your guest is sharing to your audience and to your theme. Because if you leave that to your audience to determine and figure out, they'll make up their own narrative. You need to fill in the narrative for them. Otherwise, they'll make their own, and their assumption or presumption may be quite different. So Pix has said, let's have a look here. Let's get some questions in here. Pillar 2, question 1, not yet, but we'll do. I have to do that for book interviews. Yes, Pix, this is great. Keep a note of the things that you need to be mindful of, because you've got access, being that you're a client, you've got access to all of the training. So we've got you covered. And the book that you're doing, my interviews are for my Think and Get Rich After Hours book, was based around Mentors acronym. My interviews for the upcoming The Couragepreneur podcast will be around the Courage acronym. Absolutely. So you'll be able to really funnel or shape the conversation around that courage and consistently emphasize that, bring that up in the wording and this, how you structure your question. Very, very important. Okay. So next question. Where are we up to? So the process that you have enables the guest to bring their best self to the show in a way that creates valuable insight for your audience. If you are unprepared, if you come to the show all flustered, guess what? That is going to impact how your guest how your guest shows up. So I make a set an intention right from the moment that I'm even nurturing and building a relationship with a potential guest, right through to when I open the show. It's all about setting intention and really managing and in hoping and creating and encouraging them to not be nervous, so that once we start speaking and we kind of get into the role of the interview or to the sequence of the interview, they forget that they are being interviewed. And now, of course, many of my guests are being live streamed, which gives them a whole other, areas of nervousness. As a host, you need to be able to manage that. And be able to calm those nerves down. All right, another question. I'm able to capture the right information in my guest preparation strategy to create a compelling introduction that captures interest immediately. Recently, I was just observing a conversation that was asked, a question that was asked, and the conversation beneath that. What are some of the things that turn you off-putting things from a podcast? And the one thing that consistently showed up was when hosts had fluff and banter and didn't get to the point. And so, you need to be able to structure the conversation and sets it up, creates a hook. And for people that may not have had an opportunity to even hear you yet, as soon as they hear that open introduction, they go, I'm interested in that. And it sets up the conversation so well for the guest. It creates that platform. Often I'm reading back what the guest has sent to me, but I'm sharing it in such a way and that they're going, man, I want to listen to that show. And then I realize, hey, she's talking about me. You want to create that kind of environment where people kind of step up and, share their expertise on your show. And if you haven't guessed, that complete pillar was all about your guest. For me, my intention that every single guest feels valued, creates a space where they can just shine. There's no ego there. There's been times where we've just there may have been a few things that I may not have necessarily seen eye to eye on, but guess what? That's okay. Yeah, I know. Jim has said, me too. I really hate the massive lead and introductions during a podcast. Get to the point. Absolutely. You can go back and weave that in. I think I've shared the story and I will point out that it's relevant to share now. I remember one time I was listening to a podcast host and I listened because I wanted to see how long it would take him to answer a question, which would have been a simple yes or no. And it took him over 50 minutes to get to the answer because he shared something and he said, now let me dive into that. Now let me dive into that. And it was like, the beautiful thing is you can put podcasts on double speed or 1.5 speed. And I often do. Even my own podcast is get to the point, Annemarie, get to the point. All right, so that's pillar 2. So yes, I'm able to support my guests in preparing for the show so that each show is valuable for my audience. So important. They may have certain expertise, but you wanted to help them deliver that expertise in the context that you are continuing to share on your podcast. And if you don't know how that particular guest information is relevant to your show and content that you share, then your audience is not going to be able to understand that either, be able to pick that up. Okay, when it comes to preparing for the show, you've got a streamlined process that works effectively and consistently for each show. Someone once asked me, how long does it take for you to get ready for a show? Previously, with my co-host and I, when we didn't have a process, over 8 hours, there was a lot of toing and froing. Now I have a very streamlined system, and it might take 30 minutes, may take shorter actually, but if I think of the process that we now have, and we actually give all of our clients access to this so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. I had daily shows, I had weekly shows, I had co-hosted shows that I was doing for my alliance partners and working with clients all in the same week. And I had to have a system that my team could support me in because I could not do that all myself. So I had an incredible VA that just followed the system, followed the process, and we were able to get that out, get the information from the guests, prep the show notes and everything so that I could go live and interview the guests. You have to have a streamlined process, because without a streamlined process, you can't monitor and check and tweak and make things better, improve things. So that is so important. You gather the right information that enables both you and the guest to be fully prepared to deliver a great show. There is nothing worse than not being prepared. There's nothing worse. And when you're first getting started, you may want to have a list of questions that you can dive into, because there's nothing worse than if you feel awkward and all of a sudden you don't know what to say and there's this huge gap of silence. And for some of you, you may not be interviewing guests where you can see each other. And so that silence is just horrendous. It can be horrendous. And so that makes the guest feel awkward. Similarly, if a guest talks really fast, this is where you lead the guest. If the guest speaks too fast, you can intentionally speak slower to kind of slow that guest down. Now, if you are recording and no one is listening to you, that's fine. You can actually stop the record, or you can just pause and say, just letting you know, slow down, breathe. You're doing really, really well. Now, I interview live, so I can't do that live on the podcast, but I can intentionally kind of slow down and similarly speaking a little bit quicker. But if you've got a guest that really does speak quite slowly, I'll pace, to match that. It's all communication skills, but to match that, and then I'll try and speed up the way that I'm speaking to kind of lead the guest into that. So you need to be doing this. You know how to create a compelling show title that gets found, that stands out and captures your ideal client's attention. Picks we won't share, because this is, you're in the know if you're in the know, but there's great tools that will help you be able to do a search and see what are people seeking, what are people searching for around my area of expertise, which means that if you can incorporate some of those keywords into your titles will get found. Similarly, sprinkling those words through into your show notes. So very important. Next question. I know how to put together a show introduction that creates a compelling hook. Absolutely. Like Jim said, if you can't create a hook and I often will ask a question, or you might tap into a statistic. Did you know that 65% of people who, if it's relevant to your particular content, people will say, I didn't know that. Am I one of those 65% that's setting themselves up for failure? Those are the kind of things that you want to share on right at the beginning of your intro to really hook those people in, especially when you're talking about adult learners. We tend to be more skeptical. Time is limited, so we need to be very mindful. We are often mindful that where am I keeping my attention? Do I have time to listen to that? My show formats keeps my audience engaged right from the start, the intro, right through to the outro. This is the same too with your guests. Every now and again, I'll break my own rules because I can, but you'll get to know when you can let the guest talk or not. I remember when I got training, mentoring many years ago, one of the things that my trainer taught me then was we don't really want to let the guest speak for longer than 90 seconds, because the show is not about the guest. The show is about you. And for me, it's like, no, the show's not about me. I'm the host and I'm the constant. The topic is relevant, but I do want to make it about the guest too. And, if there's a specific story, a heartfelt story that your guest is sharing, you don't want to be going, well, 90 seconds. I know that there's a story of real challenges, but I'm just going to jump in there. And Jim, who is from radio, there's always a hook. There's always a reason people might be interested. Otherwise, the guest wouldn't be interested in chatting about it either. It's just a trick to find out the most important and interesting points to raise. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that really goes to the first point that I was talking about in the components, Jim, and others who are here, the community. You need to be really aware of who's my ideal client and what are they interested in, so that you know exactly what content and how you're going to shape your introduction that's going to be a hook for your ideal customers, and your community and audience. So important. And that's something that you need to consider. So that there's nothing worse than listening to a podcast. And I have had this happen. Someone asked me to audit a podcast, a number of podcasts. And one of them, I couldn't even get past the music. And then the voiceover professional, I had to get through that. And then the banter and fluff about what the hosts were doing over the weekend and everything. And I thought, well, you're just 2.5 minutes in. I'm gone. 2.5 minutes. Try holding your breath 2.5 minutes. It's a long time. It might not seem long, but it is. So pillar 3, all about your episode. Yes, I'm trying or able to create compelling show titles, introductions right through to the outro that engages my audience. That's so important. Here's the pillar when it comes to interviewing guests. I'm confident when it comes to interviewing guests in a way that instantly engages my guest and my audience. You have to do this too. You're setting the stage right from the opening moments. I'm aware of different questioning techniques and use each technique as required to progress the conversation and keep it flowing. This is where you want to have really great a number of different questions in your toolkit, from open-ended questions to leading questions and, validating questions. Sometimes a guest, I know what they want to say, but they've forgotten, so I'll lead them. And then all of a sudden they'll click, oh, yes, and then off they go again. So you're kind of in there, kind of managing that for them. I'm able to communicate and interact with even the most difficult guests, including, here's a few doozies, the spammy guests. That's the one who keeps going on and on and on about their products and their services and their book. No one wants it to sound like an infomercial. They will get turned off. The talkative can't get a word in guest, some of those, right through to the dull and boring guest. Not that I want to call anyone dull and boring, and everything in between. It's interesting because, what's dull and boring to someone might be absolutely enthralling for others. And this is as a podcast host that's interviewing other people. Your guests may be so enthralled about the latest in scientific findings, and they may be using jargon and terminology of their particular industry that your audience just has no understanding. So as the host, you need to help them unpack, or might say to them, let's just, because this is often what I will do, if the guest shares something, a terminology, I will ask, and what I'll do is I'll ask it as if I'm asking. Or I might say, look, for those people who may not know what so-and-so is, can you define it for us so that we are able to all be on the same page? And this is what Jim says. Yeah, it's amazing the amount of people who want to spam on about their products and services. Really sad. I was talking earlier, totally agree, Jim, earlier around building trust. If you come across as too promotional and trying to get, the name of your book mentioned or whatever it is mentioned too often, it becomes awkward, and you lose trust that you're building. You break that trust. Rather give value. Give so much value that someone thinks, my goodness, that was just incredible. Because lead with value, always lead with value. There is so much content on the internet and people are still getting stuck. Why? Because where they struggle is not the lack of information, but the lack of actually doing. That's where, as an expert, as a thought leader, as a trusted authority, you can support them. You can give them every single piece of knowledge that you have developed over the years of your experience, and people would still step forward, those people who are your ideal clients, to say, I want to work with you. Lead with value, always lead with value. How do you know when you've given too much? Well, if people get overwhelmed, I would say hold it back if people are overwhelmed and you're giving information that's too much information. There's a difference between giving too much information and giving real value and providing. Yeah, but wait, there's more. Absolutely. Okay. So, and everything in between, you need to be able to manage that. There have been some times before I would go live where I would actually stop a guest and say to them, look, I'll give you an opportunity to talk all about your book. Let's just focus on the content and make the content that you're sharing so insightful for people that they cannot wait for you to share how they can find out more information and connect with you. I can't do that now on a live. And so all of the process that I've shared with you, we hope that we get to a stage where the guest does not sound over promotional, because they're doing themselves a they're not helping themselves, as I want to say. So this is all about interviewing techniques. How are you going with that? Are you masterful in your communication and in your interviewing? And are you leveraging linguistic techniques on all of your episodes? Now, you might be someone who loves humor and you love a little bit of sarcasm, and that's okay. You want to bring that through. That's the way that you might also break state. If you've got a guest that is droning on a little bit or whatever it is, you may bring in a comment that stops them, has them laugh, we reset, let's move on. So there's different ways that you can do that. Now, I am not a voice professional, and I certainly don't say that I am, but I have reached out and interviewed others who are. And so these are some of the things that they have said are really important. Our voice is an integral asset when it comes to your show, and you, of course, too. No one can copy your voice. No one can copy your voice. They can try and sound like you, but as we know, fake does not make it. And you always make sure that you look after your voice. I know for me, when I'm overtired, I get sore glands. I have to be really careful, because if I continue to overwork and stress myself out, my voice goes. And then I start coughing, and there's nothing worse than if I've been sick. And I've actually done this. Thank goodness it wasn't live, not on a podcast interview, but coaching a client, where on the phone I would ask an open-ended question and put them on hold and just cough my lungs out, because I know that if I'm not looking after my voice, I won't be able to speak. And your voice is everything when it comes to your podcast. You're aware of your optimal speaking voice, and you bring this to each and every show. There is your optimal speaking voice, as well as that was a double thing, an optimal pitch. Who knew that there was an optimal pitch? Now I know, and I can go back to some of my former interviews when I first started, and I could see that it was a lot higher pitch. I've got more of a mid pitch, a lower pitch. So I know that if I'm speaking up too high in the top, that sounds really horrible. So, and it's just awkward for me. You've got an optimal pitch as well, and you need to leverage that so that you're not adapting and adjusting, and probably not doing your vocal cords any service either. You've got warm-up exercises to ensure that your voice is optimal for every show. I have to admit something though. I don't often warm up my voice. This is so important. One of my daughters sings, and so they do a lot of warm-up. We can too for our voices, because I believe that your vocal cords are like muscles that kind of go like this, and you can damage them. So Pick says to me, what do you do to look after your throat and voice? Believe it or not, I don't speak a lot other than podcasting and interviewing and coaching with guests. What really wears out my voice is speaking. So if I've had a whole day full of interviews or something like that, or I'm exhausted, I just let my family know, look, too much peopling today, lots of interviewing. So if they ask me questions, I'll use sign language. That wears me out. So I just won't speak. I won't speak. Drinking water. Water is really important. Lukewarm water, not cold water, I've been told. Lukewarm water to keep your voice, your vocal cords lubricated, that's really important as well. Because, if you lose your voice, it's hard to be an interviewer. All right. That is your voice. It's your digital asset. It really is your asset, your voice. So very important. So do you realize that your voice is an asset? You look after it to ensure your optimal pitch to create a unique experience to each and every show. All right. So that was that. We've got some questions, but for some of you, and the reason I'm doing that is I've had a number of people that have reached out to me and said, Annemarie, we want to know how can we become better interviewers. So I've actually created, and I'm going to share with you the program Interviewing with Purpose, just in case there's a number of you who may be interested in learning a little bit more. We're going to keep this particular interview up as well for people who might stumble across it. But let me share this with you just in case this may be of interest and you think, look, this is a really great resource. Interviewing with Purpose is the link. And I just want to go through, you can go through and read all of the content that we have on there. But just to show you what's included, by the way, Pix, you've got access to this. So yes, actually, where are we here? Here we go. Wrong one here. You've got access to this. So this is really exciting for you. So when you're talking about preparing you need to be clear on your core values. So we've got a core values assessment in there where you can actually identify what is important for you. Your core values are central to who you are, how you show up, and the experience that you create for your audience. Now, not only as a podcast host, but also as a business owner. If I look at my core values and how I show up, they're very synonymous also. So they're similar for my business core values. Very, very important. Something else that you want to do is define your unique interviewing style. Self-awareness is one of the most important things that you can do. I call it a gift, actually. And it's a statement that I've been saying for many, many years. From the career industry, people were struggling with finding a career that fulfilled them, that motivated them, that they could get up on a Monday morning and go, yay, I'm going to work. And so when they identified their core values and their skills, their unique giftings, and where they would do their best work, then they were able to select a role that they would like and feel fulfilled in. Similarly as well, you've got some unique gifts as well, a unique style, mannerisms. And I have had some people that have actually, because they've been spoken over, and being given labels in the past, have discredited some of the uniqueness, which they really just need to give themselves permission to be more intentional in. And this may be something that you find as well. So we have a look at your unique interviewing style and being able to help you bring that forward. Your winning mindset, everything starts with mindset, doesn't it? Right from the beginning, if you believe that you've got a fantastic show, you've got it prepared, you've got everything in place, then you take the guesswork out of it and you can just step forward and really be there with the guest. Okay, so then we're going to talk about preparing the guest. Lots of different things in here. The key factor to preparing your guest in the best way starts from the moment you reach out. Every single touch point, every single email, every single asset, every single piece of document you send to them helps them to prepare. You don't want to overwhelm them and you don't want to underwhelm them either. Now, for those of you who have heard me talk about the Podcasting with Purpose program and who are in it and experienced it, know that some of the clients in my work and recommendations and alliance partners have come out of my guests, which is why you want to spend time in really nurturing and helping that guest prepare, because you never know, that guest may be connected to a community of your ideal clients or other stakeholders that you can then go and network with. And every single interaction and conversation and action is going to develop that, which is why it's so important. So we've got different templates to be able to help you capture the right information, give them the information that you want from them to be able to create some great show notes, put together compelling introductions. All of that stuff is in that as well. We also help you set up the stage for an awesome interview, the different formats. I call them the plug and go show formats. It's like, now do this, now do that, now do this. And then you just fill in the gaps, making it easy for yourself. How to create compelling titles, short, compelling titles that is going to stand out. There's certain things that you don't want to do, and certain characters even that you don't want to put into your show, into your titles, because it's just not going to come across well on some of their platforms such as Spotify and things like that you need to be aware of. How to create those show introductions, the outros, and everything in between, giving you lots of examples so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Interviewing techniques. This is probably the most where people really worry and get anxious around, how can I interview people? How can I show up to the call and get the best out of my guest so that I don't have an interview? And this has happened. It's happened to me, where you've listened back to a show and you think, I can't even publish that. That is so, can't do it. And you've had to go back to the guest and said, look, we're going to have to re-record that. You don't want to get into that situation. So again, we talk about mindset. We also talk about the different questioning techniques, how to pose a particular question, what questions, it suits a particular conversation, where you would use different types of questions, again, to dive deeper. Or maybe the guest is deep, diving so deep, they're going to overwhelm clients. So what do you ask them to bring them back up again? Kind of big picture, and chunking it down. There's different techniques that you can use, as well as what we've included, 31 go-to open-ended, what I call conversation starters, for those times that you know what to say when you don't know what to say, to avoid that awkward silence. And what I used to have in front of me was a list of those questions. I don't need to do that now. But, you can glance at them so that you go, oh, I'm going to pull that question out and I'm going to answer that. And your guests won't even know that you've got that list in front of you. And then, of course, dealing with difficult guests, the spammy guest, the guest who doesn't shut up, the guest who hardly says a word, the guest who is a little bit dull and boring, the guest who contradicts themselves over the course of the interview. I've had that happen before. And then I've had to go back and I've kind of had to dive a bit deeper. And then all of a sudden they realize, oh, actually, yes. And because otherwise, if you don't, your editing team, or if that's yourself, will have to go back and just edit that, because, your audience will come, hang on a minute, they said this on one hand and now they're contradicting themselves. The guest who bounces around all over the place and with confusing content had them, the nervous and anxious guest. So we'll certainly help you with that. And optimizing your voice. I actually went out and interviewed a master voice coach, and she was able to share some warm-up exercises, the importance of discovering your optimal voice. She'll show you how you can identify what your optimal speaking voice is, and a quick way for you to find your optimal pitch, which is really the starting point of your voice. So interviewing with purpose, for those of you who are interested and want to find out more. But for now, I will answer questions that you may have. What questions do you have? Maybe about the course, maybe about what we have been talking about. Hey, Heather, good to see you here. Great insights. I am glad. Good. Oh, Pix, what did you say here? Annemarie's training is a step-by-step system, yes, to podcasting success and monetizing it. Yes, you're going through that. It's a personal development program too. Yes, I know, because it's really helping you build your business online, but also integrating a podcast, because as we know, the voice audio is really such a great way to build a deeper engagement and build that know, like, and trust with your audience for sure. What questions do you have? Do you have any questions at all? Otherwise, if not, and you've got what you need, we will end today's call. I'll just wait a little bit here. Of course, when you're thinking about interviewing, as I'm waiting to see if there's any questions, it's a skill, and I think often or a new skill or a new way of communicating, because you're communicating and asking questions, providing, feedback and your own thoughts on that matter, so that it's, not just of one viewpoint in the show takes time. You're developing it. You're welcome, Pix. It takes time to learn and develop. And one of the reasons why I put this course together was I knew it was a huge learning insight for me. And I probably learned with a lot of trial and error. And I thought, if I can help other change makers shorten the learning curve, avoid all of the mistakes that I have done, and a lot of the mistakes are over the hundreds. In fact, I can't even remember how many interviews I've done now, but there's a lot of mistakes that I've made, and I would hope that I can teach you on how to avoid those so that you can set your podcast up for success, and interviewing too. And also too, interesting point that Pix has said, and this is something that Pix's comment has reminded me, there are a number of change makers who are using interviews to get information from guests to become part of a book. And I know that someone who actually is a client, or she purchased Interviewing with Purpose because that's exactly what she was going to do. Interview guests for a book and then later on bring her podcast to life. But she needed to capture that information. That's going to help you do that as well, because how you manage a call or an interview with the person that you're interviewing for the chapter of your book, again, is going to determine how they show up and the kind of content that they share. And it's often in a conversation that just flows, and that's set up, that's prepared, that's set up, and that just flows, that all of a sudden, there's the minds meet, and the conversation that comes out of it's like, wow, that's the kind of interview that you want to do. That's the kind of interviewer that you want to be. And that's kind of what we captured in Interviewing with Purpose. Okay, I don't think we've got any other questions. We will be back here, or I will be back here along with my awesome peeps who are joining me next week, same time, 10 a.m. If you've got any questions about anything you might not have wanted to ask in an open forum, please DM me. More than happy to answer that question. Otherwise, interviewingwithpurpose.com is where you can get access to the course that I just shared with you. And of course, for those of you who are just jumping in, let me know where you are watching the replay from. Always good to know where you are from. All right, here's this one more comment. Did I just have an epiphany? Think and grow courageously. Courageously, would that be something? I don't know. Maybe you have. All right, bye for now, everyone.